Welcome back to another episode of Hard Money Dispatch, the show that demystifies sound money and helps you see the system for what it is. On today's episode, we have Gil Roberts and Josh, aka Secure Sovereign, from the Bitcoin Commons, which is a new node software, an alternative to Core and Knots, and they're going to be telling us all about that today. Josh and Gil, welcome to the show.
Thanks.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks for having us on again. I think the last time we were on, I was on, was in November, and we were super early on the project. We've been able to prove some of the stuff out that I did talk about. Some stuff did make it, and we're just happy to have be back on your show. Talk a little bit more about what we got.
So why don't you give us an update of all that, like where it's been a while, where have things gone in the last 4 or 5 months?
Well, I wanted to bring Josh on because you've been doing the work, buddy. It's 10-hour days repeatedly for months on end. We started this. I mean, I ran into you October, right at the beginning of October.
Yeah, it was not much code at that point.
How far had you gotten? I think when we talked, you had gotten from August. Really, the idea is spurned in August.
Yeah, it's been about 8 months now.
So when I signed on and when I was on this episode, we talked, we were still talking about fast IBDs and like all that kind of stuff some of the assumptions that we had initially made.
Mm-hmm.
Now that the software exists, which is something that's very interesting, right?
Sure.
Yeah. We found out a lot of real information. So I wanted to bring Josh on to give you a little bit of time.
Yeah. I'll tell you about it. So I have a background in software development. I've been coding since I was a teenager. Spent most of my life in front of screens. When I recovered my Bitcoin in 24, I dedicated my life to Bitcoin. I started researching the governance situation in the summer of 25. Didn't really like what I was finding. So I did quantitative analysis of the governance of the Bitcoin Core repository and basically as much of the history of the project as I could to get as objective sense of the project as I could. And there's a lot of opinions out there. A lot of people throw a lot of adjectives around, but I wanted to just be as scientific as I could possibly be, rather than just believe one narrative or the other. And I think what I've proven is that Bitcoin Core, which is running 99 point some percent of the Bitcoin deployments right now, is an informal oligarchy. And I say that, and I don't mean that in like a pejorative way. It's entirely natural that it developed the way that it did. And that said, I think that is an attack surface that can be solved. And that attack surface it was something that was prohibitively expensive to solve prior to the advent of AI. And so now we have AI, and I've got a life-changing amount of Bitcoin and nothing better to do than work on Bitcoin. I've decided to try my hand at doing a from-the-ground-up implementation of Bitcoin, census-valid implementation of Bitcoin, and basically provide a strong alternative to Core that is not a fork of Core.
And I think this is Brian, when I was originally on, this was the idea, which is that we wanted to build a node implementation that was 0% Core, but still 100% Bitcoin. You know, we're Bitcoiners. We're not altcoiners. We don't want anything to do with that, right? We want to make sure that what we're making peers and is in consensus. And we've done that. Ultimately,
I think so.
Yeah, or at least the first version of it.
Yeah, the first question I asked was, what is consensus? And if you ask a core developer, they'll tell you, consensus is embedded in the 300,000 lines of code that is Bitcoin Core. And so it's entangled with everything else. They call it in the industry, they call it spaghetti code. And so if you want to change anything, you have to contend with the spaghetti code, and you basically have to be a master of 8 different disciplines in order to reliably change this code. And so, there are a very limited number of people on planet Earth who are competent enough to do that. And even if you found them, Bitcoin is, I would argue, severely underfunded, so you wouldn't really be able to pay them anyway. So that's kind of the problem. And so by re-implementing it, we can eliminate a lot of the technical debt and have a proper separation of concerns and separate the system, and architect it better, and that way we can reason about the system and define consensus very precisely, so we can know what we're talking about rather than worrying about all this spaghetti, and that's kind of the issue is. If you're a developer and you're confronted with 300,000 lines of code that nobody's competent enough to maintain, then the impetus is to not do anything, because if you mess it up, then that's your reputation, that's your lifeline, and so by breaking it up and making it more modular and kind of more digestible, that allows us to adapt. And that's the goal.
Modularity is huge, because when we talked, we were talking about, core versus knots. And in a module system, both parties can have what they want without ruining anything, right? So you can download a ordinals module, and you and your ordinals friends can trade ordinals on the Bitcoin chain. If you don't download it, you don't even know they exist, right?
That's the key. By the way, that's the key, is you don't have to participate in that if you don't want to. And in any way, so we're working on a number of things to mitigate spam as well. That's a big concern of mine, and making sure that if you don't want to participate in other people abusing the chain, you don't have to participate in that either.
Right.
Currently with Core, you don't have a choice. So that's
even if you don't like it, you still have to download the data once to prune it away. So you don't have consent, right? And the idea with the module system, you can opt in, opt out, which you could have modules that are more actively filtering, right? Like kind of aggressively filtering stuff. Or if you're just someone that doesn't care either way, you don't even know what's going on, right? Because your node doesn't have that module, so it just ignores all that stuff. So you can have offensive or defensive modules on a particular topic, or you're just a person, which most people are, they just don't care. You don't even know what's going on except what you see on there. And really what that boils down to, if you kind of pry that up a little, it allows the free market to determine if these things are in Bitcoin's future or not, right?
Right. Whereas if you have a informal oligarchy, like you put it, Josh, then you don't really have much of a choice. And I like the way you phrase that, because that sort of summarizes my whole issue with Bitcoin Core starting last year, was that it wasn't so much about any particular change they were making per se. It was more just the fact that they had the power to go and implement said change despite any lack of consensus from the community, and there wasn't really a strong alternative. And that was the first time that I kind of saw a significant issue there. So how did you guys, you said it's 0% core, Gil. How did you guys go about building this thing from scratch?
Well, with your story, you started it, and that's why I wanted to kind of talk about August and then get up to where we were and then what's happened since. So with AI, and it's only possible with this. So I would have, to be clear, there's been about 17 years of Bitcoin now, right? It's really been in the last 12, 24 months where any of what we are doing has been possible. So we can't throw any of those folks in the past under the bus. We don't do that. They were operating under a certain time. But now with AI, it is possible for you to spend a lot of tokens. And so, this isn't something that you could do with your GPT instance, but you can spend a lot of tokens, and you can go, what is consensus to an AI? And they'll chew through that 300 plus thousand line code base and returned a essentially mathematical proof, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And like math, which is not code, which can be verified by people that don't know code. It's helpful if they do, but you can get mathematicians from a university. And what that does is creates a specification.
That's right. So we created the specification. It was extracted essentially from Core's code. And then in Bitcoin, we don't trust, we verify. So I have all this math, but I don't necessarily know if it's consensus or if it's accurately specifying consensus. So the next step was to create an alternative implementation to build off of that mathematical proof rather than as a fork of Core. Then we can start doing Bitcoiny things with the alternative implementation. And the step after that was doing differential testing.
Yes.
So essentially, we are rerunning the entire blockchain and checking the results to make sure that our implementation behaves exactly like Bitcoin Core's implementation. And if there are any divergences, we fix our implementation and we amend the math proof until the math proof is basically as close as is possible to what is consensus.
What's key about this math proof is not only we can take this proof and build a brand new, brand new code, completely brand new Codebase Bitcoin node that's 100% Bitcoin, right? And allow other people to do it as well. So this makes forking a viable option, right? And this is, as an outsider myself coming in, and looking at a lot of this stuff, it was surprising to me that forking was used as an aggressive weapon, because in a lot of softwares that it's very common for. Look at Linux, right? Like it's very, 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 very common to use forking. It's actually an advantage to a lot of these softwares, but here it wasn't, and it was strange to me as a person with some software experience, to see that, because I used to get, when I ran my software development agency, not a developer myself, had employees that did development. We forked stuff all the time. That's what the customers, they paid us to do it. So when I got here, it was just so confusing. And now once I met Josh in October into September, that's when the light bulb kind of came on. That's when you and I first started talking about some of this stuff.
That's a good point. I never thought of that, but you mentioned Linux. There's forks all over the place, right? You've got Ubuntu, Debian, Linux Lite, Arch Linux, Linux Mint, Fedora. Like there's just endless forks and there's slightly different variations for different purposes. Kali Linux. So yeah, why should it not be the same with Bitcoin?
And look at something like Red Hat. They employ like thousands of people. It's a fork that opened up, high-paying tech jobs for thousands of people, right? Like over its course of time, right? So it's, it was just very confusing, right? To see that basically used as a weapon. Oh, you don't like what we say, go fork yourself, right? Like, well, normally, yeah, that's what you would do. I mean, that's for best practices over the last 2 or 3 decades in software. That's the way that this worked.
The issue is that without a specification of consensus, you're basically stuck following core, because core's code effectively is consensus. So that really has been the problem. That's why you don't see a lot of alternative implementations, though they've been called for a very long time. Without that, it's cost prohibitive, not impossible, but cost prohibitive. And I think we made significant progress on that front. And then we can use this, as Gil mentioned, we can use this tool not only for validating our own implementation, but also allowing others to build implementations and then make sure that it is consensus valid.
And with that specification, and you'll probably unpack this a little bit more, but we have where it will lock. So if somebody comes along and makes a brand new Node OS and they use our specification, it has to lock to that, or it's not Bitcoin, right? And that's really what that spec is doing. This is orange or this is not. Right, because when we set out on this, we're not altcoiners, right? We're not looking to do that. We are doing everything we can to prove that it's not some other coin, right? Because Bitcoin's a protocol, and protocols like the internet protocol. There's not one piece of software that runs all of the internet, right? There's all these different routers and Cisco and all these other companies. They all operate on a specification, which is the HTTP protocol, right? Why doesn't Bitcoin have this? And that was another confusion. Like, where is that?
The math proof is machine readable too. So basically, not only can a mathematician read it, but the machines can read it. And then, as Gil mentioned, we're locking the proof to the implementation. So in other cases where you have a math proof, like for example, in altcoin land, Ethereum has something called the yellow paper. But the yellow paper is more of like a suggestion, and it's kind of drifted away from the actual implementation over time. They're not updating it over time. Whereas in our case, if you wanted to, say, make a change to consensus, which we're not recommending, but if you wanted to do that, you would have to update it both in the math proof and the implementation simultaneously. And if there was some sort of, there's drift detection, if there was some sort of divergence in either side, it would be immediately apparent. So it's a very conservative thing to do. It's like incredibly hard to break.
Well, something that when we first met that kind of helped me understand it, and as a person from the outside looking at it, is that there's 2 types of ossification, right? Like there's good ossification and there's bad ossification. And good in this instance is what makes Bitcoin orange. 21 million, blah, 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 difficulty adjustment, all that stuff, right? But what shouldn't be ossified are things like when we first started talking about it, is like the networking.
There's about 80%, 90% of the code base is not consensus and is 15 plus years old, and there's a lot of room for improvement. And so, and most people who deal with the code base, I think, would agree that there is a lot of room for improvement. But a lot of people conflate both the good consensus code with all this other sort of technical debt, and they say no one should touch any of it because we don't want to break anything. And when everything's intermingled in its spaghetti code, then it's very difficult to make the distinction between what is consensus code and what isn't. And that's again, back to why we had to re-implement it to have very clear boundaries about what is consensus and what isn't consensus. That way we can change the things that can and should be changed and updated while not messing with making what is orange, what is Bitcoin.
Right.
Sure, there'll be some kind of resistance initially. Some people won't trust a new node software implementation, and there'll probably be some people from the old guard, so to speak, who try to flame and troll you guys, say this is an attack or blah, blah, blah. We can get into that later, but I think it's very important to have different implementations because everybody always talks about, the centralization of mining, the centralization of the supply, and those are important issues, but pales in comparison to the centralization and control of the node software, in my view, of the actual protocol at the protocol level. As long as nodes are distributed and there's flexibility and choices there, then I think protocol has a very good chance of staying alive, staying decentralized, and all that. But so if I understand it right, what you're creating is not just, core knots, and now you have option number 3. It is that, but you can also take Bitcoin Commons, option number 3, and create your own variations if desired, right?
That exactly. So the part of the goal was not simply to create an alternative, but to create a market for alternatives. And markets need enabling infrastructure. So that's essentially what this is it's the roadway that allows a plurality of strong alternatives to emerge.
If consensus is hidden in the core code base, we're only ever going to get forks of core, right? So we had to like find it the best that we can, and we challenge anybody to come help us, right? Criticism is not bad. We're here to help. We're reaching out to actually universities and math departments at universities to help us verify some of this stuff. So we challenge anybody to come help us, right? Your criticism isn't adversarial, it's help. So with that specification, this enabling architecture is there for others to open up more and more of these implementations. For me, and I'm oversimplifying it, but we're kind of creating the Linux of Bitcoin nodes because it is meant to be forked. Like this is meant to be forked, modular and forkable. And we're looking at things like applications and plugins that can also go on top of these things.
It gives the go fork yourself threat some real teeth because it instead of having to inherit 300,000 lines of code and 15 years of technical debt, you're instead given a choice where you can simply fork the bit that you disagree with. So if it's split up into 4 or 5 different pieces and you only disagree with one piece, then you can fork that piece. You don't have to fork the whole thing. And then that allows you to create this market and have a plurality of strong alternatives.
And how difficult would that be for the average user to actually create their own fork in that manner?
So not only is the repo broken up, I think pretty well, but also the governance itself is forkable. And these days with AI, basically everybody's a software developer. Back in the day that might have been very difficult, but nowadays pretty much anybody can do it.
Yeah, I haven't coded in 2 decades, and he got me hooked back in just January of this year, and I've been obsessed. Yeah, it'll bring you back. It'll bring you back. Everybody's a developer. That's absolutely right. And look, throw your AI at us, not for development, to just try to poke holes in it, right? Try to chew it down. We encourage that because we want to make sure that it is orange. We're not, we don't want anything else. We want Bitcoin for these things, and we just want to have the escape for people to be able to, as Josh said, have teeth in that thread of I will go for it, right?
And yeah, it's like, so maybe you disagree with us. Maybe we build it out and you don't like how we're putting it together. That's fine. Like part of the way we're measuring the health of this project is the ecosystem. And we want at least 2 or 3 forks of other teams that aren't us participating and maybe doing things a little bit differently, and then we can kind of copy each other's homework and see what works and see what doesn't work.
This is why it's free and open source. Like we're not keeping any of this. This is something released to the community. Josh, you have intentions to get other people key holders in at some point?
Yeah, so we're still phase one. We don't have a key holder cohort. Once it'll be some time before the governance system activates, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it.
Yeah. So, but I say that as an illustration that, like, even ourselves, we're wanting to give this into the community, because if we build it and we'll have our version, but it'd be like Red Hat, right? We're going to build Linux and then we'll kind of go off to the side and make Red Hat, and that'll be our thing, right? Where other people can make Ubuntu or any of these other ones. And it's I like the Linux example because a lot of people can connect with that. They know what that is, and they see a lot of different versions of it. And it's like, that's exactly what we want to do with Bitcoin nodes.
And so what I hear a lot of is like, well, won't this make these civil wars worse? We'll have this extra coordination layer. Now there will potentially be this plurality. That's chaos, right? And I think the opposite will happen. I think this is a very conservative move that will reduce the sort of inflammation of the civil wars. If you and I disagree on policy, you can very cheaply fork it, run your own node, and then instead of having a big political war on Twitter about this policy or that policy, it's an architectural dispute. You run it how you want to run it. I run it how I want to run it. And when it comes to consensus, well, sure, there's still going to be a political element to consensus. You can never get rid of that. But if you very clearly define consensus mathematically, at least we know what we're reasoning about, and we can, instead of arguing with each other and calling people mean names, we can actually get back to engineering, and that's the goal.
I'll give a real world example. Let's say Josh hates spam and I want to spam the chain, right? Like we're on opposite sides. Now with a conservative specification sitting in between us, we can go, well, we both agree it's 21 million, and we both agree difficulty adjustment, and we both agree on this and both agree on that, but we don't agree on what goes in the op return, right? Well, that's fine. He can run his side that keeps that op return real close, and I can you can staple War and Peace to every transaction that you want, right? So, and we both can do that. Who's running his nodes? They never see anything I'm stapling to these transactions, right? And my buddies, we all get our monkey JPEGs, right? So, and that's why we say it.
I do not condone monkey JPEGs.
Yeah, neither one of us do, but it's, Bitcoin, we have this conversation sometimes, which is, Bitcoin's open and permissionless, and we have our opinions, and we are of the same opinion when it comes to this stuff. Bitcoin is money to us. But it is open and permissionless, and it means that, and there's not, regardless of the adjectives, none of us are in control. And as soon as people start kind of asserting that control, that's when you see the name calling and the wars and everything else that comes along. And really what it is just the structure and the way that Bitcoin was created and had to survive, and all the suffering it's been through as a community and as a protocol throughout these years to get to where we're at today. It made sense in the early days to be small, ambiguous, right? So that there wasn't a lot of attack surfaces. And for that time period, it was appropriate. But now here we are, $1.5 trillion, exceeded $2 trillion at one point. We're heading back that way, right? It's just not the same. And there are participants that would love to come in with capital, but because of the way that the code base is laid out and the inability to understand what in this code base is actually orange, right? And nobody has the ability to actually say that and point in those 300,000 lines of code, at least like one section. And when we talk about separations of concerns in the software, that's what this is. A good example is the wallet bug, right? The wallet deletion bug that just went through. If those things are separated, and let's say Josh and I have a dispute over should Bitcoin nodes have some kind of organic wallet in them or not, he can have it removed. I could keep it because it's not necessary. If you went into core and deleted those pieces of code, would it run? Probably not, right?
No. Yeah.
Yeah. See, it would get
ugly. So there's a lot there. I think to put it simply, I would say the civil wars are a function of the monolith, and the monolith has sort of grown incrementally over a long period of time, and it's become unwieldy even for the people who know everything about this code base. And it's become so unwieldy that a bug that is literally deletes people's Bitcoin managed to get through 2 pull requests and over 100 reviews and 2 years worth of review. Okay. And that's a massive failure mode for Bitcoin. And so, I guess the goal here, the main point is by making the code base more tractable, then the review is easier, because instead of having to look at 300,000 lines, you're only looking at 30,000 lines over here or over there. And then it's not as confusing. And it's also, by the way, it's easier for AI as well. That's another thing. The AI will spend a lot more tokens trying to reason about 300,000 lines of code than it will 30,000 as well. So, there's a lot of benefits, I think, in the long run.
It's something else. It allows people to become experts in certain pieces of the Bitcoin protocol. They don't have to be the crazy person that knows like every 300,000 lines. Like, people can actually begin to specialize into things, and then we can get even better things for Bitcoin protocol out of that. This isn't anything new. This isn't revelatory. This is what software has been doing for decades, right? Like, so we've put it back in. We've just taken the best practices and just stuck it back in.
Very good. I don't understand the criticism of this would somehow make the civil wars worse. If anything, this is like the ultimate solution. And I would imagine it's part of why you guys created it, because my thing is, I also believe Bitcoin is money. But at the same time, and I remember me and Gil talked about this a little last time, I don't want to tyrannically impose my worldview on what I think Bitcoin should be on every node worldwide. So it kind of puts me in a tough position. If I don't like this change that's in core, I don't want to run it, but I also don't have good alternatives. I also don't want to, again, force other people to adopt my version of the protocol. So what do you do? And I think that's the perfect solution, is just having the option, an additional option, and the option to take that and create your own fork of whatever you like and don't like. And who knows what that could lead to, because some other enterprising group later on could add to your guys' work and, make further improvements. For example, it may not be just, I want to cut out this one thing I don't like. I feel like, how has this not happened sooner? I mean, we're 17 years in.
Well, yeah, great question. And I'll point out that when I first started doing this work, I ran into this talk by former lead maintainer of Bitcoin, and he was calling for alternative implementations as early as 2014.
Yeah.
So this is not a new thing. I'll point out though that a lot of money showed up from, less than scrupulous sources in 2015, and then the block size wars erupts, and
Immediately.
a lot of things happen at that point, and then these alternative implementations never emerge. Then there's all this PTSD in the community over the block size wars, because the only sort of outlet for the Civil War was to start getting personal. And, there was no governance solution. There was no architectural alternative. So it became personal. And then people, they're quite literally traumatized. They don't want to revisit that sort of really traumatic period in Bitcoin's history. And I don't blame them in a way. I mean, who would blame them for that? So I just, yeah, right. And so, and there's all those. And essentially, I guess, because of that and the history of Bitcoin, the maintainers have, via their discretion, they have got two choices. They can take one of two risks. One risk is the status quo risk. The other risk is the innovation risk. And they're both a risk. And so on our behalf, they're choosing for the entire community to take the status quo risk. And there are good reasons to take that risk. I'm not going to take that away from them. There's reasons not to mess with consensus and be very conservative, and I totally get that. But there's also, reasons to innovate. There's also reasons to adapt. And eventually not adapting, not innovating is going to bite us. And one of the ways that I would describe that is, we're seeing a brain drain. We're seeing a lot of innovation happen in stable coins and altcoins, and people they are good coders. They come to Bitcoin, and then they have some sort of contribution, and then they reach a governance wall. They reach some sort of wall, and then they're they're basically dismissed. They're told, we don't want your contribution, so long, sayonara, and then they leave and they never come back. And then the attrition rate, according to the research I did, is almost 90%. So, a lot of people, they just leave and they never come back, and then they go do anything else.
Outside of really high turnover jobs, like 90% churn gets HR departments fired. Think about how, and then that reputation gets out, so then it starts to dwindle, right? Because there's only so many bodies, and as you churn through those bodies over the years, there's not a lot of new bodies coming in, right? So eventually the developer pool it almost becomes its own little cabal, not because it's set up that way, like intentionally, it's just that's who's left.
Who's left, right?
And I'm not a developer, but I've heard multiple times from multiple people that, if you've ever tried to work on Bitcoin, you'll understand why it's better to go to Ethereum or Solana or whatever, because they just have more flexibility. They're able to do things easier. At least that's what I hear. So yeah, that is an unfortunate kind of brain drain. And imagine if just some of those were to come back to Bitcoin, that would only be helpful, I imagine.
Exactly. And then Bitcoin will, Bitcoiners will complain about the lack of review while basically inadvertently pushing out a lot of potential reviewers. So it's like, you want to have your cake and eat it too.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the problem.
Yeah, you see these review things, and it's like contributors that start with small, kind of work their way up. They get their footing, right? They can get a little bit more confident in the Bitcoin code, and we'll just use Core as an example, right? They get more confident with this big thing. They become reviewers, right? So if you're not bringing contributors in, keeping them, they can't upgrade into review. So yeah, your review pool's thin. You're churning your entry level people. Like you can't get supervisors and managers if the employees keep leaving. And then you also lose one of the key things. This is over on the corporate side. There's no knowledge kept past, right? From a human being standpoint, there's no learning, no organizational learning that continues, because the people that learn things, they leave, right? And they don't share anymore, and they're so mad that they go do something else.
And right. It's kind of a drawback or side effect, I guess, of a truly decentralized thing. I mean, there's no Bitcoin foundation, so to speak, like there is with some other, coins.
Right.
So there's no formal structure to have that kind of thing happen. But yeah, hopefully, like you guys said, this will attract more investors and create a little more incentive to build out new things. But where are you guys in terms of, you can make, if you're trying to make a point, Gil?
Yeah. I'll wrap this up.
Sure.
You've hit the nail on the head right there. More investors, more serious capital. Now, it's not that Bitcoiner capital isn't serious, but there's a lot of people on the outside. What is it? 4%? We're at 4% of the globe. We got 96% of the other people. What about the other 96 out of 100 people in the room? Right? It's those people that can take us more seriously and maybe bring some money. Look at, it's not the Linux Foundation, using that example again. It's Red Hat that is the large for, these are the things that grow off the top of these types of capabilities that then are allowed, that become investable, and the capital can begin to line up. Look, people that actually know how to invest and make money in high risk venture capital are not here to clean up our mess with their checkbook, right? They're not going to clean all this up. They're not going to show up, which is why they show up at a lot of these other coins, right? And give them the money that should be coming to us, because they're not going to come and clean up our mess. And until we get this, at least in my opinion, I think your opinion, until we get this kind of cleaned up, a lot of this stuff isn't going to break open for us. Not like it does. And you see all this ridiculousness with these altcoins and these other things. And you wonder why. And it's like, well, they come look at us and our house is out of war.
And we're always fighting with each other. There's one civil war after another. It's wild.
They're not going to pay for that to get that cleaned. So we have to clean that up. And hopefully what we're doing is helping.
I imagine the ROI is not as clear cut or substantial either, right? Because I'm not a venture capital investor, of course, but if I were one and I saw an opportunity where I could get in on like a DeFi token drop thing or a ICO, like IEO kind of thing, then it's very clear for me, right? Hey, I make an investment in this whole thing, including the developers and the marketing and everything else. And then I get these tokens at a cheap price and I can dump them later. Whereas for Bitcoin, the incentive is not as clear.
Right. And in 23, I think there was some research that showed that Bitcoin was funded to the tune of about $8.4 million. Ethereum, I think, was in the same year funded, was it 50 million or something?
Yeah, it was like,
And I'm not saying you should use Ethereum. I'm just saying, like, as a matter of, scale, Bitcoin is underfunded. And even though it's worth way more than Ethereum ever will be.
yeah.
And so that's an issue. And,
It causes, well, this is something we talk about a lot, which is it causes conflicts of interest, right? If the funding is, the altruistic side of the funding is low, that means those people that, they got bills and habits and families and stuff to pay for, right? Like they have to go get that money from somewhere. And if the altruistic sources aren't delivering, they're going to have to go to other sources. Now, that doesn't mean that other sources are necessarily bad, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're good either, right?
It'll skew their incentives to whoever's paying the bills. And ideally what you want in an open source project is you want self-funding, you want self-sustaining funding mechanisms. So the project is essentially paying for itself, and then it doesn't have to cow or
it's not beholden to anybody,
right?
It itself is free, right?
Exactly.
So, yeah.
So that's what we're aiming towards. That's a high bar, but that's what we're trying to do.
So where are you guys at in terms of the real world application? Like how close are we to
we're working on deployment. Yeah, we're working on it right now, actually. So the differential testing is complete. Fuzzing is complete. And I mean, honestly, it might be a matter of days.
By the time this podcast is published, it'll be released, I would suspect.
There's a good chance.
Yeah,
I think.
yeah. Because, yeah.
And that doesn't mean it's finished. And it's still early, and I wouldn't recommend people transact their Bitcoin over the experimental node. It'll take some time for the battle testing, but we're going to start deployment very soon, and we'll see from there where we go.
Yeah, so version 0.1, right? And I'll echo that. We're looking for people to come in and download it, put it, break it. It's gonna break, right? It's new software. Come test it. We want live bullets. Don't put real money on it, please. Not yet, right? It's soon. But come and help. And adversarial, if you're one of those people that kind of like disagree with all the things that we're saying, great. You can come and fork. You can it's open. Fight it. Help us, right? Like this is, we really want it to be Bitcoin, right? And for us to free these alternative implementations and allow people to actually experiment without actually breaking Bitcoin, right? Or creating a new coin, because with that spec lock, it allows them to actually dream up new use cases for Bitcoin without disturbing or causing wars or any of these other things, which makes Bitcoin more useful, which makes people want to buy more Bitcoin. And, there's a whole number go up aspect to that and all those other kinds of things. But ultimately for me personally, it means there's more Bitcoin users out there, which freedom money is getting out. It's got to be useful to people.
Use cases has kind of become a dirty word in the Bitcoin space, and I get it.
And so is forking. These are normal words, folks. If you're listening to this and you got a problem with use cases, I'm sorry. Everything you do is a use case. Right? Riverside that we're recording on this has a use case of recording podcasts.
I think money is the primary thing. It wouldn't have a $1.5 trillion value if it wasn't for money. That said, there are other things that are possible. I think at least from my perspective, I want to see spam off a chain. And we are going to great lengths, I would say even further than Knots is, to provide heuristics and filters and selective synchronizations and various ways to mitigate non-monetary transactions. So when we're talking about use cases, I'm going out of my way to make sure that that's not monkey JPEGs.
And I'll define use case for those in the back that have politicized it, right? Use case is something where a node software can do automated accounting for a Fortune 100. It has nothing to do with putting anything on chain, right? These are use cases for node software, right? It's not. And this is what's infuriating for people that come with software development experience or that coming from the outside in, which would also be people with checkbooks for Bitcoin-based startups, right? They see this stuff and they say use case, and people get all infuriated. Like use case is something that we've been using in the English language for a long time, and it has very, very large amounts of meaning, right? And it is the same thing with fork. Fork's a dirty word. Why? We talked about that at the beginning. That shouldn't be the case. These are normal things that people have perverted, for some kind of political cause, right? So when you think use cases, you don't have to think about monkey JPEGs. It's how you would use Bitcoin as money, right? There's a zillion use cases if Bitcoin is just straight money and you had op return was set to 0 or something. There's still 100 tons of use cases. So when people think about use cases, you also got to think about innovation.
Well, I'll give you some examples that should be inoffensive to people. In the module system, we've got a datum module, we've got a stratum module, we've got selective synchronization. There's all sorts of things that could be integrated into the node that would benefit from being integrated directly, that are use cases that, like you said, have nothing to do with putting anything on chain.
Yeah.
A mesh network would be a perfect example of something that would be helpful for nodes. One of the things we would like to do is make it give some incentive to node operators to run nodes, even if it's just a few sats. Maybe they could transmit arbitrary data that never ends up on chain, get paid to do it using the rails of Bitcoin, not necessarily the chain. And right now there's no incentive to run a node. That's that's one of the major problems. There's obviously incentives to run miners and mine Bitcoin, but there's no reason to run a node unless you
lightning route.
Yeah, well, unless you're using you're doing like non KYC Bitcoin, and then you need to transact your non KYC Bitcoin privately over your own node, and that's such a small fraction of people. So
that use case is small, right? Well, we're looking for these larger ones, and you bring up a good point. I mean, there's so much more that we could do with these nodes that isn't just spam. Spam's just the soup du jour of what everybody's arguing about, right? But there are plenty of use cases for corporates, plenty of use cases for small business owners, and plenty of use cases for others. And the module system, which I think was honestly, Josh, the module system is what brought me on board, right?
Yeah.
Because then I understood it's like, oh wow, as an entrepreneur myself, I can actually take this. I have no desire ever, never owned altcoin, never wanted to own one, right? Never want to make one, but I want to be able to innovate on Bitcoin, but I don't want to be called this. I'm not that, right? And right now it's so risky to do it. To even say the word use case. It's like, well, use case, it's so silly, right? Like as you unpack it, it's like, okay, what grade are we in? So
I think it's like a psyop almost. I mean, the term use case, it doesn't even apply to me. What use cases are there for gold, for dollars, for things that are used in history like rhinestones and seashells and glass beads? And then when you talk about, look at all the altcoins. No one questions, what is the use case for XYZ altcoin? They all have some proposed use case that is like their value prop, and it's just sort of implied that they're good for that, and that's what they're for, and that's why it matters. Whereas it's another one of those things where it's only Bitcoin that it's targeted at, just like the quantum computing threat breaking ECDSA. It's not a problem for anything else, any other encryption out there. Doesn't matter.
That's absolutely
But the fact that it can break Bitcoin wallets, that's an issue we got to focus on.
It's silly, isn't it?
Well, there actually, I'll push back on that lightly, and I will say that a lot of those other things like fiat and banks and the military and all these other things that you might like point your quantum computer at, those have like armies behind them that will like find you and like take you away and put you in a little box, Whereas Bitcoin, its greatest strength is being decentralized. That's also its greatest weakness. There is no army of Bitcoin that's going to protect your Bitcoin. And that way, it's kind of a lower hanging fruit, a target to.
That brings something up. This is just a complete spitball, just something as we're sitting here talking. Having, a quantum threat, let's just tease this out a little bit. Wouldn't it be great if we had this nice, easy, forkable Bitcoin thing where we could kind of move in the cat and mouse game with quantum, right? Where we could actually, we can try like, here's 5 different forks of different styles of quantum resistance. 3 go down, right? 2 survive on, and then they keep adding and upgrading. If we have to have a 2 to 3 year civil war every time that we want to add some kind of quantum resistance, we're toast.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. There's no flexibility. While we can play the flexibility game, and again, with specification, it's still Bitcoin. So we can move with the innovation of the quantum side and just be much, much more responsive to that. And different market solutions can come out to be responsive, different modules or plugins or applications. as well.
Yeah, that's all true. It is sort of low-hanging fruit. I suppose there'd be no real consequence if you were to crack, Satoshi's coins or whatever. There'd be no one coming after you, so to speak. Although you would completely tank the market before you had a chance to really cash out too much. But then also, who is gonna be doing that? Like, is it gonna be some rogue employee at Google or IBM? Because the only places where the infrastructure exists for a quantum that could ever be functional, stable, long term are at these giant corporations. Someone's going to have to access it. That person's also going to have to decide this is what they want to do. And then they're going to have to figure out a way to cash out efficiently. They're also going to have to figure out a way to get away with it, because if you're using, Google or IBM's infrastructure to do that, that in itself is illegal, right? It may not be illegal to take old coins with the public keys exposed. Using the infrastructure for that is illegal. Greg McKeska, a guy, very early Bitcoiner, kind of like yourself, Josh, who I had on the podcast earlier this year, he mentioned something that it's even the actual breaking of ECDSA is not as simple as it seems, because the idea, as I'm sure you guys know, is that you can look at a public key, you can derive the private key from that, and it's as simple as that. But he noted something. I haven't done all the research on this, I admit, but in his words, the public key is a hash of a hash. I looked into it, and that's not entirely accurate. Like, it's not literally a hash of a hash, but that's sort of the easiest way of putting it in plain English. In other words, the important point being a public key is not a direct derivation, like one step removed from the private key. You guys probably know more about this than I do. So how accurate is that kind of statement?
Look, I'm not a cryptography expert, but I do believe that I don't think it's straight. Right. It would be too easy to crack now if it was just straight on, public, private. That's it. Just one derived off the other, and it's that simple.
To your point, there are a lot of mitigating factors, and it's a big what if, and it may never happen, honestly. I mean, that's still a possibility. There could just not be a cryptographically relevant quantum computer that attacks ECDSA in some meaningful way. That could still just not happen. Like, it's not a certainty.
It's always presented as an absolute certainty and an urgent, imminent certainty. Like, it is going to happen. And that's another thing, like the use case kind of psyop, right?
And it's only Bitcoin, right? Like, not the nuclear codes, not the banking system, not any of the other coins. Only Bitcoin. And that's why Bitcoin's going to zero, right?
And not all the altcoins, the millions of altcoins who are way more vulnerable because they reuse public addresses, most of them.
I'm honestly, I'll be honest, I'm a lot more concerned with the governance of the repo than I am with quantum. And I don't think that, necessarily these five guys who have merge access are going to merge in some code that will be obviously bad and everybody will see it's bad, and then we'll all fork away. I think honestly it'll be more like we incrementally move away from the principles that are inherent in the protocol. And the thing that I think a lot of people don't get is that principles are engineering constraints, and that the minute you start lifting engineering constraints, you start drifting away from your principles. And so it won't necessarily be obvious. The wallet deletion bug wasn't obvious, but it still managed to get into production. It still managed to delete people's Bitcoin. It'll be something small. It'll be a series of small things over a long period of time. And that is why we need a very clear specification so we know what we're talking about and we're not, guessing. Minimal guessing. Less guessing, more engineering.
And with AI, we don't have to do this guessing game anymore. Right. Like that's where, especially with what's happened in 2025 here and into 26, like with AI, it can help us get this done. Like, ultimately.
Yeah. And people don't believe it. AI and its capabilities, when used correctly today, reminds me a lot of Bitcoin 10-ish years ago, where if you tell people about it, there's like, no way, not possible, too good to be true, got to be something wrong with it. I'm building a new website for myself. Don't even know how to write basic HTML or CSS or anything. Oh, I can make I can make emojis in HTML, but that's about it. And it's just asking Claude. It does everything for me. I give it some, information to feed off of in terms of my brand and myself and stuff and the old website. And it just creates these beautifully done web pages, all on brand, perfect messaging and design elements, and everything is just amazing. And people I can't wait till I make it live. I have the pages built out, trying to get my old domain back that I lost from a company that went defunct, but that's a whole nother thing. But once I make this thing live, I can't wait to show people because everybody doubts, man. Nobody believes that you can do these type of things.
You rattle that off at the weekend party, and the guy's like, "Yeah, that's pretty cool, man. That's wild, bro. Oh, did you see the game last weekend?" And you're just like, it tells you there's going to be a short window. This is one of those kingmaker situations, just like the internet in 1989 to 1992 when it was super esoteric, right? To get on the internet, the original. I like this. I had a kid that I went to high school with that made 6 figures doing MySpace websites. Like that was like, and people were like, "You do what?" And you're like 17 years old, and he was making like $200,000 a year. Like within months, he was just crushing them. He was charging like $200 or $300 an hour. It's wild, right? So, and these are limited windows. See that collapsed. Like all this stuff is limited, and here we are in AI, and you see the game, bro, reactions to this stuff, and you're like, I had a software development company that had 30 employees. It's just me now, right? And that was well over, and these were interns. That's well over $250,000 a year in salaries I was paying out, right? Like people just don't.
I will say, having a law and software background myself, did a ton of coding, probably wrote hundreds of thousands of lines of code back when you actually had to write code back in my day. But now, and I did some back of the napkin calculations just using AI, I'm at least 50 times more productive. My development velocity has gone up considerably, and I'm able to do a lot more with a lot less. And now I'm kind of, I'm sitting in front of this AI, and an extra 30 minutes represents in my mind like another 2 weeks worth of work. So I can't pull myself away from it because it's
very Moorish.
Yeah. One more prompt.
Yeah, he got me hooked on it in January, and I ended up sleeping on my couch because I would just stay up till 4 a.m. It was like I was in high school playing video games over the summer again, just up till 6 a.m. playing it. Yeah, I got hooked on that stupid Sims game.
I'm sorry.
I know. And, it'd be like you turn around and it's like you look and behind the window, the sun's up and you're like, oh, right.
I'm too old for this.
Yeah, especially now. I was young then, now, but yeah, it's absolutely addictive because you begin to build so much value, not just for yourself, but I mean, we're doing it with open source software. There's so many things that this is breaking open, and not to make this an AI show, but I think it's important to understand this because this is a technology that was required to go into the 17-ish years of Core's Codebase and extract what is Bitcoin, right? Show it to me.
Well, yeah. What is the governance of it? What is Bitcoin? Build me a new Bitcoin, differentially test to make sure that it's actually Bitcoin. Like all of AI was used the whole way. And soon we'll be doing code review, probably, very disagreeable code review, mind you, but code review nonetheless to make sure that, it stays orange.
And to that point, just to continue with the original questioning that set this off, where are we at right now? Some of the cool things that we have is we've had our first contributors that aren't us.
Absolutely, yeah.
Like that happened. Like we actually have community members and more than one. It's not just their mom, right? So coming in and saying we're doing a good job. It's more than that. There's actually folks that have now started to step up and understand what we're doing, why we're doing it, and the necessary condition that has placed this upon us, right? And this isn't to diminish Core or Knots or anything that they're doing, and we believe they should continue to do that. Sure. And stay focused on those kinds of things. And we know that Jimmy Song and company are also looking at another core, like a third core versus, size of Core Knots, and then production ready, I think is what it's called. So, and that's fine too. We totally support all that stuff. And there's other guys out there that have tried. We're not the first ones on alternative implementations. And
sure.
Yeah, as you said, that was Gavin Andreessen in 2014, more specifically, is the one that called for those during you can find the recording, but he called for these alternative implementations back then, and so we support all this. Our just approach is to make it let's get rid of the technical debt, right? Get rid of wallet deletion bugs and any of those other kind of baddies that might be hanging out there. And then allow people to innovate by giving them a specification. Go, this is what Bitcoin is. If you violate this, you're not a Bitcoiner, right? Here's the rules to the club, and give them that so that they can go do fun and useful things. Like I think here's something we did. We just upgraded the networking in Bitcoin, right? Just moved to IRO.
So
what was the age of the networking that?
right, yeah, that's
Yeah.
ancient. And so and by innovating and adapting on the 80% of the code base that isn't protocol and isn't this sort of should be ossified part of it, then that actually makes Bitcoin a lot stronger. And there's a lot of things that don't have anything to do with consensus that would improve Bitcoin a lot. And so, we're exploring these various things that we can add. There's a whole slew of different things that we're looking at. And then we'll just provide them as options to the community and then let the free market decide. It isn't for us to decide what you do with your node. We're just trying to provide you with maximum optionality so you can figure out what you want to do.
Right. And then all the nodes can play nicely together. I like real world examples. I'll give another one. We all have internet routers in our house, right? Some of us block certain types of content because we might have children in the household. That doesn't mean that I go to Josh's house and go, you know what, if you have that, you're a bad person. You should block that stuff on. You should filter those internet transactions, their information over that HTTPS, but you're a bad person if you don't do that. And I also don't go to his house and go, if you do that, you're a bad person, you're paternalistic, and all those other the counter arguments to that,
Sure.
right? Another great example that I could think of is, especially with the networking, that also begins to open up vulnerabilities, right? If we're not keeping up with the general internet, right? Because it doesn't operate in a vacuum. There's all these other technologies that are going on. If we don't keep up with these networking protocols, and as just the general internet matures and advances, from a technical perspective, that causes vulnerabilities to Bitcoin because it's using these older technologies and nobody wants to touch it. Back to broken record here a little bit, but because of all the spaghetti code, because you don't know which thread you're going to pull and it breaks consensus.
And you ruin your reputation in the process.
Right, because you might be doing this completely altruistically. I'm just upgrading the networking, and you pull one of those consensus threads, and now there's 42 million coins instead of 21 or something like that, and then you're an altcoiner, right? And people throw you out, and you're literally just trying to make it better. You're just trying to help, right? And yeah, it's a problem.
There's another good analogy in there. I think it definitely should make Bitcoin more resilient, having different implementations, because to use the router analogy, imagine if everyone in the world who used the internet had one type of router made by one company, and they all worked the same and had more or less, 90+% the same exact specs and settings and everything. Well, if that somehow compromised, you've got a much bigger problem than when, everyone has different routers. Some people have gateways from their ISP, and you can change all your settings and all that stuff. So yeah, it's kind of like the Linux analogy in a way, I think.
Sure. And the sort of catastrophic scenario already happened. I mean, in 2017, 2018, there was an inflation bug that was deployed to production for 18 months, and that would allow somebody to essentially mint an infinite amount of Bitcoin. And so much for the 21 million cap, right? Fortunately, it was disclosed responsibly by a security researcher who didn't want to destroy Bitcoin. And by the time it was explained what the risk was, it was already over. But to your point, Brian, if you had multiple implementations and then one of them accidentally introduced an inflation bug that allows you to mint an infinite amount of Bitcoin, then it only affects the percentage of the network that's running that particular implementation. It doesn't affect the whole network, mitigating the threat. And that's essentially is adding security.
And because there's multiple implementations that are not like basically nepotized to each other, right, with Codebase, it gives a warning signal. If I'm running a completely separate Codebase, but we're still Bitcoin, right, because we have that specification, and Josh has just mistakenly put that wall, it just gets into his Codebase that he's running, I could warn him, because as soon as that begins to diverge away his implementation, or maybe it's just a node runner, the one that he's running, as it begins to move away, there are other implementations to sound the alarm bells, like, hey, this isn't Bitcoin anymore.
Right. We can ourselves be a check against core moving too far out of consensus or policy even. So, I mean, we could apply the same methodology that we're using, apply our specification, our differential testing to core itself over time. This is not our main goal right now, but with time, with more funding and effort, this is something that will secure the network for everybody, not just for us.
I'll give one last point. It takes the pressure off of core a little bit, I think, right?
Yeah.
Because they're not the only show in town and have to answer for everything Bitcoin, right? And they're human beings. And there's been several iterations of maintainers and lead maintainers and all this other kind of stuff over time. So it's not to beat up any particular crew. They've done the best job that they can for the most part, given the resources and everything. So it takes the pressure off of them, right? And then if you have divergent opinions, like a Knots crowd, they have an outlet immediately to go do that. We don't have to go through this. And I think that kind of brings us back around to where we started, right? Like this is what this is. It allows for proper forking, good ossification, get rid of the bad ossification. We don't ossify the networking stuff. The internet's going to progress, right? We want to ossify what's orange. And then we can move on. We can innovate. We can build proper use cases that we don't have to argue over with anymore, right? And Go Fork Yourself has teeth. There's no monopoly, right?
And the Civil War.
And it may end most wars going forward, because if there is a disagreement, because they will be, we're humans, it's going to happen. Instead of us having to propagandize or argue or get political, you can just go fork it very easily and see if your solution has purchase in the market. If it doesn't, guess what? You lost. If it does, great. Maybe you have a little niche. Maybe it's really big. Maybe it's super popular. And now you have the next best mousetrap, right?
Yeah.
Right. Those are being handpicked to a certain extent right now, right?
Good timing considering all the new quantum proof proposals coming out. Really good timing, I think. I don't want to get into all that today. Maybe some other time. But starting to wrap up here, now that we kind of brought it full circle. How do people learn more about you guys and Commons and what you're doing?
So our website is thebitcoincommons.org. The is important. So thebitcoincommons.org. We have our implementation is btcdecoded.org. So the commons is the governance, and we're aiming for over time having multiple implementations. BTC Decoded is just our implementation, and then I have a website, sececsov.com, where I have the governance analysis that we mentioned earlier, and a bunch of articles that I've written about Bitcoin's governance and its funding and argument maps and various aspects of my research. So that's available for people if they're interested.
I'm writing, you can find my writing at Gil, Gil Roberts, ROBERTS.net. It's got all my media profile, all my writings you can access through there. And also some of the other podcasts and stuff that we've gone on and talked about these topics and others. My writing, for those that want to get deeper into maybe the business side of things, or if you're a TradFi person that might be experiencing Bitcoin for the first time, don't panic. Come read my writings, right? And it's going to give you that footing, because I explained my background on our first podcast. I'm a TradFi guy that defected. So I've got a lot of writings that allow for those folks that are now coming into Bitcoin. Well, we just had $12 trillion Charles Schwab open up, right? Or is in the process of opening that stuff up. For those folks that are now coming to Bitcoin, which is the other 96 out of 100 people in the room, my writings help kind of break some of this stuff down. And I have a series about where the power is, and if you have any kind of, these power centers, and then how money is moving around, and why commons and all these things we've discussed is important. I've been putting those out since January, so those weren't available on our first podcast. So this gives a more academic, businessy kind of approach to it. If you're not a cypherpunk person or something that's going to be more nitty gritty, maybe you're a president or something of a company, or you're a small business owner with a decent amount of employees, might be interested in some of this kind of stuff, go take a look. Just gilroberts.net.
Nice. All right. Thanks, Josh and Gil. This has been a very important episode of Hard Money Dispatch. If you liked it and you found value here, please share it far and wide, and be sure to subscribe to the Hard Money Dispatch newsletter. Link will be in the description. And like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Leave us a 5-star review. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or elsewhere, the podcast is small but growing, and appreciate your support. It's free, easy way to support the show. Well, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Brian.